Hi there. Welcome to the Health Analytic Insights podcast. This podcast is all about creating a community of like-minded individuals who are passionate about the field of health informatics. I hope to share information and advice in topics such as health analytics, digital health, biomedical engineering, and data visualization in healthcare. And in exchange, I would love to hear from you, dear listener, about your experience and interest in this field. You can drop me a line at healthanalyticinsights@gmail.com, and this email, along with any references discussed during this podcast, will be listed in the show notes below. If this resonates with you, don't forget to follow and subscribe to this podcast, as I'll be releasing new episodes bi-weekly. So thank you so much, Kathryn Riddell, for coming on the Health Analytic Insights podcast and talking all about water safety. I first met Kathryn at the University of Guelph, where she studied water resource engineering, and I studied biomedical engineering. And then we did our final fourth year capstone project all together. So we were able to meld our different disciplines. So I'm really excited for all her insights that she's going to give on water safety. And so let's get straight into it, Kathryn. Can you tell us a bit about your background? And can you describe just like a specific project or incident that really got you passionate about the field of water safety?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me, Elena. This is fantastic. When it came to water stuff, I remember a time in high school when I, was really passionate about music and really passionate about art. And then I started getting into science math from class. And I started noticing, and I always really, really loved math. I always excelled at math, but I just figured you couldn't just do math for your day job. Like I didn't know you could just do that. Like I know that there are some people who went that route, but there was a kind of time in my life where I started to think, am I going to pick something artistic or am I going to pick something more science math based? And I started to lean towards the science math thing. I heard about engineering. I heard about this water resource engineering program. And when I heard the name, I was like, well, that's neat. Because I had just started watching all these like water documentaries in high school. I think it's like when Netflix first kind of hit, and I was able to just watch like Blue Gold and World Water Wars and like all these kinds of documentaries talking about global water scarcity. And in Canada we have it pretty good, right? Like it's something that really sort of blows your mind when you've always been able to turn the tap on and trust that the water you drink is safe. I got really, really passionate about it. I got really interested in like the idea of let's shrink that disparity in water access for the developing world, for even parts of Canada as well. I'd say that it was sort of around that time, and then I found this program at Guelph, and then every step of the way through like a program like water resource engineering, you get to get back to that point. You get to get back to that, both the technical and then the passion side as well. So I've had lots of opportunities to kind of stay along that path by finding like this charity that I worked for this year. For instance, I spent 4 months working for a charity. So 10 years after the fact, when I was 16, I was like, oh yeah, like I want to drill wells in Africa. And then I did the undergrad and saw, oh, it's a lot more complicated than that. And then worked with Engineers Without Borders, learned a little bit more about international development. And then working with this charity this year, I got to actually, hey, let's try to update our procedures on drinking water and on testing water in the fields and that kind of stuff for bacteria. And the application was Uganda and Ghana. So I thought that was really cool. So yeah, I'd say that was sort of what inspired me and along the path. And I've just sort of kept trucking along this whole time. And I was so lucky because a lot of people at 16 don't know what they want to do. And a lot of people at 18 and at 20 and at 22 don't know what they want to do. But so many times I would come back to it and say, no, this seems right. It works for me.
That's so awesome that you're able to have that dream at 16 and then see it realized this year. So that's amazing. And also you said something about in Canada, you don't really think about how lucky we have it just to turn on the taps and have clean drinking water. But I remember reading this article that really stopped me in my tracks. I think it was in 2018 or 2019, where it was like an Indigenous reserve. It was like the first time they got clean water. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit about the current situation of water safety in Canada and the divide between some of the water quality supplied to Indigenous reserves versus the rest of Canada. So could you talk a bit about that issue?
Totally. And, I am not by any means an expert on this, but I've been doing some research on it and I find it to be a very important and interesting issue. And just interject if I'm talking too much or if you want to clarify anything, because I'm just going to start rambling. So just feel free to just go let you know. So in 2015, our current Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, was running for office. and he made a commitment to eliminate all long-standing boil water advisories on First Nations communities at First Nations reserves by 2021. We're almost December 2020, right? So we're at that point. We're getting pretty close to 2021, and the deadline is coming up fast, and that hasn't been a priority. Neskintanga was just evacuated, about a month ago, maybe. They had to get evacuated because of a boil water advisory issue. The last time that I looked, there was 41 existing boil water advisories for First Nations reserves in Ontario alone, not across Canada. And keep in mind that there's a lot of First Nations communities, particularly BC. There's a lot of nations in BC. So, at the time, Maclean's had kind of wrote an article about what the feds would have to do to follow through with that campaign promise, right? They made this big, lofty campaign promise. Let's eliminate all these long-standing boil water advisories. And they made that commitment. And Maclean's kind of said they'd have to put forward about 11 or 12 billion. I could be wrong with these numbers, but it's around that amount. And they only put forward about 3.5. So they were falling short of what the commitment should be to meet the requirement to provide water to these people. And I think that one of the things that's frustrating about that is I'm not sure if I really trust the government to evaluate whether or not they're meeting a boil water advisory being lifted. An example that I'll use is one community that I've done more research on recently is Pekanjikam, which is in Ontario, and GC Indigenous, which is the Government of Canada Indigenous Twitter. They made a statement in 2019 saying we have eliminated the boil water advisory for Pekanjikam as of November 2019. Mm-hmm. Cool. Except for the fact that Pekanjikam has 450 homes and only 30 of those homes are connected to the water. And the other 420 homes do not have running water. They do not have water heaters. Wow. They have several, in some cases, a couple generations of people living under one home because there's only been homes built, along a certain timeline. And they're a population, Pekanjikam is one of the last nations that the children speak Oneida to each other. Everyone speaks Oneida, you know what I mean? So it's this is a community that you really want to preserve. Not that you want to not preserve any of them. All of them should be taken care of, but it's just really frustrating to see that when they're saying, look, we've eliminated the boil water advisory, but actually the vast majority of the community has to walk with a toboggan in minus 40, minus 30 degree weather to the water treatment plant at the top of the hill, collect water, bring it back to their home. And then how do you bathe in freezing cold water? I don't know. Wow. So that's the perspective that I would throw on that. Again, mm-hmm. Not an expert, but I'd say that it's good to see the progress. It's good to see improvements, but I would judge the improvements based on what Indigenous people are saying and not maybe so much based on what the government's reporting.
No, that's really interesting information. I'm definitely gonna put some show notes in the show notes, some links, and hopefully, Kathryn, we can talk afterwards about some links that we can put in the show notes for people to learn more about the issues.
Sure, yeah.
That'd be great. I was wondering if you could move a bit more to the international issues, some of the global challenges that might be happening around the world with regard to water safety. I'm sure you have insight on that, so I'd love to hear some information about that as well.
Totally. When it comes to the global issues, I think a lot of people will kind of conflate climate change with pollution. And I find that the whole conversation around saving our planet and our planet's going, is being destroyed and whatnot, I find it's really helpful to end up shrinking down and getting down to the actual technical problem, right? Because we get very emotional about some of these issues, but at the end of the day, there are technical problems and we have technical solutions. We see this with Boyan Slat, I think his name is, the young entrepreneur from New Zealand who's working on the ocean cleanup project.
Oh, yes.
And, he's worked, yeah. So it's not just him, his team of people that are, looking to get rid of the great garbage patch in the ocean, as well as try to stop some of the garbage from entering the oceans with these collection systems in the 7 largest contributing rivers of the world, which are in India and I think Maybe the Nile might be one. So there's garbage in our ocean. That's a problem, right? Then there's climate change. Then there's too much carbon in our atmosphere, which is offsetting the balance of our equilibrium that we're so comfortable with, right? And what we've been seeing in the water world for some time alongside climate change is essentially like what we learned about in school and what a civil engineer designs to is a 2-year storm or a 5-year storm or a 10-year storm. You have these terminologies, right? So you have a graph of frequency and intensity in which they are inversely related. So you could take Ottawa, for instance, and say, I have all of this rain data from the last however many years of the Ottawa region, and I will take a graph and figure out what the 10-year storm is, because my building code tells me that I need to design this swale for a roadway, on the side of the 401. I need that swale to be able to accommodate 10-year storm worth of rainfall. So every 10 years, there will be a storm of this intensity. And then the most intense storms are like a 100-year storm, right? And a 100-year storm event, it's such an intense storm event, it only happens every 100 years. The problem is with climate change, 100-year storm events happen every 5 years, happen every 2 years, right? So all of the previous designs, now we have to over design things because we're getting floods that are changed. Like our floodplains are changing, our flood patterns are changing, and we're also getting drier parts in certain areas. So more arid regions are becoming more deserted, as well as too much water in other areas. So we have the problem of flooding versus drying out. When I think of specific regions, there's also a lot. So that's kind of happening across the globe. But then there's also specific regions that are having some like unique issues. One being like depleting groundwater really, really, really significantly. You drill a ton of wells and you deplete the natural groundwater supply and you suck it up and use it, pollute it, and then it goes to your wastewater treatment plant, and then your wastewater treatment plant outfalls into the ocean. Your groundwater has legitimately like been displaced from the ground into the ocean. Mexico City has been a sinking city for a number of years. Yemen is a good example of this. So the commercial cat farming, they were farming so much of this. It's like a tobacco crop, and it's like you chew it. It's like a chewing tobacco, and it gets you kind of high. And so it's a very popular drug in the Middle East because there's not as much alcohol consumption in the Middle East. Mm-hmm. So this cat farming that was done all over Yemen, they would drill deeper and deeper and deeper and more expensive and more ridiculous wells to get to the groundwater that was deeper and deeper and deeper below the below the ground level. And local farmers couldn't afford to bring out the really expensive rig. I do a lot of drilling with my job right now, so I know that it's the deeper you go, the harder it is to do. And they depleted their groundwater supply so significantly that no one has water. And I've heard some say that the conflict that's happening in Yemen right now, I mean, there's got to be a correlation. I'm not saying it's a causation, but there's got to be some contributing factor along the lines of, people don't really have a great water source. So California is also having a huge kind of water problem. We all know South Africa with like day zero. They had a day zero a few years ago where they were really concerned that they're going to run out of water. Fortunately, it rained and their reservoir filled up again, right? So I'd say that like every place has its own unique water problem. Even Oakville has its little water dispute right now with our neighbor for floodplain stuff. But I definitely wanted to talk about Yemen, and and Flint, Michigan's an interesting one too. I thought I would mention that because thanks. just because Flint is like, it's so close to Ontario. And what happened with Flint is that there is a river, the Flint River, and then Lake Michigan. And Flint had been using Lake Michigan water, which is much more neutral, but the Flint River is much more acidic. So it's a lower pH. So when they switched to the Flint River water from the lake, all of a sudden they have this acidic water going into their old aging infrastructure, which is a problem globally, aging infrastructure, huge problem. Toronto, Cuba, like huge problem, right? So the acidic water that was now entering into this pipe, when they read the policy, they read the policy wrong. They said, oh, this policy says that we need to monitor for a year and then put an anti-corrosion plan in place. But in fact, the policy meant put an anti-corrosion plan in place and monitor for a year, right?
Oh gosh.
So they just read the policy wrong. Like it was that, like, it was a bureaucratic mess up, you know what I mean? And they started supplying people this water that hadn't been treated appropriately and was too acidic and was quite corrosive, and it corroded the pipes. And then people were getting brown water because they had old lead pipes and it was corroding extra rust and all this stuff. And the whistleblower on that was a pediatrician, a young woman, a female pediatrician who decided to test the lead level, like her patient's children. And she sounded the alarm and said these kids have too much lead in their blood, right? So lead is a problem in a lot of places. We do a lot of testing in Toronto and whatnot for school boards to make sure the kids aren't getting too much lead in their water. But yeah, that's kind of what happened in Flint. I thought that was kind of interesting. I kind of want to share that little tidbit.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. And you're so knowledgeable about like all the topics of water safety, both, within Canada and internationally. Can you suggest some like books or podcasts or like websites that we can look into and turn to learn more about water safety? Because this is obviously a very important issue when it comes to climate change. And even that story that you talked about, the pediatrician deciding to test water quality. And I think this is some general knowledge that we should all really try and learn. So I just wondering if you had any resources that I can share with the audience members.
Yeah, I mean, this is the one question I actually struggled with the most, because I've picked up little bits and pieces from so many different places. And I'd say the Flint issue, she didn't actually test the water quality. She was testing her patient's blood for lead. Like she was actually testing the children's blood themselves. Like she was taking blood samples from the kids with the parents' consent. So there's a great movie about that. I learned about that issue first from a podcast, but that there's a great movie about the Flint issue. I've listened to like little podcasts here and there. You know what I mean? That's kind of where I learned more about Yemen. And I wouldn't say that there is one standard good podcast that I could recommend. I think that it's more frequent that I hear a water expert featured on a podcast. So if you search a certain issue and then you find a global health podcast kind of thing, that's where I found some interesting tidbit. But it's a good question, because for example, I took an undergraduate degree in water resource engineering. And there's a few things that I learned from work that I wish I had learned in undergrad, or I wish people knew. Like, I just wish people knew. Like, how about this? Hot water is not drinking water. When you fill up your kettle and you fill up when you make pasta, you know what I mean? Like when you boil water for your coffee, you should fill up your coffee pot with cold water, because hot water is not drinking water. Hot water comes from your water heater, and inside your water heater, there could be bacteria. There's no treatment. Like hot water heaters are quite prone to growing bacteria. So that's one little tidbit that I never. Right? Like, yeah. So that's one thing I would say. And then the other thing is, when it comes to just general household safety, particularly if you have young kids, I would say when you are taking a sample, this is from the technical side. If I'm taking a sample from a tap, I will take two samples for lead. I will take a standing sample, and then I'll take a flushed sample. The standing sample should be 6 hours. You haven't ran the tap, you haven't used any water, and then I go and I fill a liter, right? And then the flush sample, I'll flush the water for a half hour, and then I'll come back and then I'll take a sample. The flush samples are usually okay. The standing samples are often the more, like, it's quite frequent that they have more lead in them, because the fixture itself, the piping between your tap and when the water comes in from the road, anywhere in there, if the water's sitting in there for a prolonged period of time, the longer the water's sitting in there, the more chemicals get leached into the water. And then when you take that first sample or take that first drink, that's what has the most either lead in it, or sometimes there's lead in the solder for the fixture itself. So we did a school board sampling program, and there was some brand new fixtures, brand new sink, or a brand new water fountain that had a quote unquote chewable concentration of lead, as
Oh,
the engineer
wow.
that I worked with said it. So it's just chewable. I was like, I'm sorry, what now? Anyway, because it doesn't look like it. It looks like water. It smells like water. You can't detect lead, but it's bad for children. So if you have kids, if you have young kids, I would say just do not give them water that's fresh out of the tap without flushing it a little bit. If first thing in the morning your tap's been sitting overnight, if it's 6 p.m. and you've been using the water all day, it's fine. But if you have been, it's the first thing in the morning, you wake up, you go pour a glass of water, and then you give it to your kid, it could have slightly more lead. Or what I would say is potentially get your water tested for lead. Get your home, all your faucets tested for lead. See if you have lead in any one of your fixtures and see if it's a problem, because then you can get peace of mind and not even have to worry about that. Or if you don't want to do the testing, just flush it, get a couple liters out, and then go ahead and take the water. I say.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
I know that doesn't
Yeah.
really answer your question. No, I'm sorry.
Yeah, absolutely
I
does.
love podcasts, so I would say, you'd search on a regular podcasting app and look up a water issue that's interesting to you.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to your own water, just I would say your local municipality, whoever supplies your water, if you're on a well, it's your responsibility, right? So you have to take responsibility. Like you may say, oh, I've never had any problems with my water. Well, until you have a problem, right? So having someone to test your water or evaluate it for you if you're on a well, if you're rural, or if you're in a city, you can just call the city and say, hey, I've got some questions. Can you send me the report? And then you start to have a better understanding of the kind of water you're drinking on a daily basis.
Yeah, that's so important, especially something that's, powering your body every day, for you to try and make sure that you're as educated as possible. So I was hoping for the final part of the podcast, we could completely shift gears and talk a bit about career and talk us through, your career path from, graduating at the University of Guelph to now being an owner at the KSR Environmental, and how you came to be self-employed. And can you talk a bit about pivoting and what that means to you?
Sure. So when I finished at Guelph, I had done the co-op program. So I was very fortunate in that I applied to one job when I finished school, and they hired me back, and I got to work there full time for about 4 years. And it's a great time. I worked for an engineering firm called WSP, one of the bigger firms in Canada. And I had trained in the rural servicing team. So as I just mentioned, wells. So once you get outside the city limits, instead of your home being connected to municipal water and sewer, you would have a well drilled onto your property, or another kind of water source, a cistern or something like that, and then a septic system or a holding tank or another kind of sewage system. So I know lots about that world, and that's what I'm now launching a business in. So definitely wasn't expecting all of this, and I'm part of this Halton Small Business Center training program right now, and it gave a definition of entrepreneurs, and it said, you're this kind of entrepreneur, you're that kind of entrepreneur, and one of them was like a haphazard, or you fell into it, essentially opportunistic. I think the word was opportunistic. And so yeah, I did kind of fall into it. I quit the corporate job last year because I wanted to try something new, and I went traveling. So about a year ago, I was kind of hit the road, and I did a few countries in Europe. I saw my friends my family in Ukraine, and that kind of stuff. I came
Can I just
back in
interject?
February. Yeah, totally.
I just think I think that there's, I don't know, a mindset like, oh, should I put off traveling for later? And I feel like the pandemic has really taught us. I'm sure like the experiences that you've had in the last year traveling have just been even more now valuable due to the pandemic. So that's great
Gosh,
that you
it's
took the time to travel.
I thanks. I mean, like, it's funny, right? Like, I feel so bad for, like, so many of my friends that were like, yeah, next year, 6 months. Yeah, I'm saving up. I'm like, wow, I'm glad I went. Yeah, no, I traveled for 3 months, and I came home on February 22nd. And so, I had some promising kind of corporate interviews early in the year. And one that even Shannon, our like fellow 401X lady, tried to help hook you up with at GHG. So that was exciting. But then the pandemic hit, and things really changed, and everyone stopped hiring. And I understand that. So I got a job locally, little part-time gig. I did get some support from CERB, thank you government, and I also then got a Canada Summer Jobs job, which is also paid by the government. So that was me working for the local water charity, which was really neat. H2O for All. So they just had their gala, and essentially they are a charity. Their purpose is just to bring water to people. So they work in a few countries on the eastern side of Africa. They work in Ghana on the west side, and then they work in a few countries as well in the Caribbean. So obviously this is a bit of a different year for them too, because they're not traveling the way that they're used to be doing. Like we're not working in the office together. We're not having our fun kind of like intern lunches and the kind of stuff that they used to like to do. So bit of a different environment for them. I worked entirely from my own laptop and at home. So it's sometimes the whole work-life boundary disintegrated in 2020, I think, for a lot of us.
Yeah.
And then, I had a friend reach out to me, a previous coworker actually. She trained me a lot at WSP. She was kind of like my big buddy engineer, EIT, when I started as a co-op student. She trained me in the field. And she reaches out to me and said, hey, do you want to do some casual hydrogeology work? And I was like, what's casual hydrogeology work? Hydrogeology, by the way, is groundwater. That's just another example of us making things more complicated than it needs to be. But anyway, I said, yeah, sure. Like my charity job's about to end and maybe I'll just, and to do that, I needed to become an independent contractor. I was going to be an independent contractor and work for this firm in Guelph. I sort of was forced into it, but then now that I have this small business center training and I also have some work from the hydrogeology firm, I've been able to see and take a step back and realize that I have an opportunity to potentially employ people. So I'm going to start inspecting. I'm basically, from the business model standpoint, there's a lot of people moving rurally. You don't really need to go to the office as much as you used to. So my assumption, and I'm hoping to confirm this, a little market research, is there's going to be a good market for people who are purchasing a rural home and need someone to take a look at the well, the septic, do a sample from the well, get a sense of what's in the water, and give them peace of mind. They know that I'm a PN, I'm a professional engineer. They know that this is my training. I've inspected hundreds of systems myself, and I also was responsible for a program where we inspected over 1,000 systems every summer. So I always was the final call on those reports and making the last decision and being the one on the phone when the homeowner is upset with the results and all of that kind of stuff. So I'm really, really comfortable with all of that work. And maybe it isn't exactly what I want to do for the next 40 years. But I think in this time, what do we know is going to happen 40 years from now? You know what I mean? This is such an uncertain time of our lives, right? So I can see myself doing essentially, which is really, really cool. I could have an engineering firm that does inspections and engineering work, that does reports and monitoring services, and build that out and have that as my focus area for the next couple decades. So that's kind of my thought. I do want to pivot later to carbon, because I think that carbon is the next big thing. I think that management of carbon is our next big thing. Because if you think about it, Canada is actually physically capable of saving the world from the climate apocalypse. So if we just sequestered enough carbon from the atmosphere and we inject it back into the ground, and we're able to mitigate the 1.5C, the 2C, because we're 1.2, 1.1 now, C. We're going to get to 1.5 and then 2. It's going to be bad.
That's really cool.
I think that in the next few decades, I think carbon's going to be limited. But for now, water. Yeah.
Water. That's really cool that you pivoted and started your own business. And I agree with you that I think, we have all these companies like Microsoft and these big tech companies that are allowing people to work from home into 2021. And I think that it's the housing market is just absolutely insane in Toronto. I think people are going to be moving out to the more rural areas if they can afford it. And then just, maybe even if they have to go to the office once or twice a week, I just don't know how many people can afford to live in downtown Toronto. So I really hope your business goes well. And it's amazing that you decided to start it.
Thanks so much. Yeah. And I think that I don't know if there's a big move of this happening, but from the realtors that I talk to, they say yes. I can understand why. I also have been preaching for this, before COVID. This is probably one of, if we can think of upsides of COVID, if the whole working from home thing is just out of the bag now and people can do it. Environmentally, it's better. Balance in terms of work and life and seeing your family, it's better.
Into
And it's
appointments.
always, yeah, and it's always kind of been a thing that seniors and juniors weren't really matched on it. If I don't know if you've noticed this at
Yeah.
all either, but senior management are always allowed to do whatever they want, work from home. We always trust them. But the juniors, hey, if they have a 2-hour commute, sucks.
Yeah.
You know,
Get
sucks
your,
to be you.
your butt in the chair and you work there for 8 hours, even if it's not really a function of your job.
Even if there's an office closer to you, like even if you have like so I think that culture shift has got to happen, because at the end of the day, you're paying for someone's brain time. You know, and if we can do everything remotely, we can do everything remotely, like climate conferences, for example.
Yeah, I remember
that.
Like, why are people traveling in a plane for a climate
like, that's the first one that's got to go. Yeah,
you gotta really
anyway.
what you do. So thank you so much, Kathryn. This has been absolutely a great wealth of information. I'm so glad you're able to come on the show. And my last question is, what advice would you give to students currently going through specifically engineering? What advice would you give them during this difficult time in terms of—
don't buy your textbooks.
Yes, exactly. Don't buy
it.
It's
an open book final. Buy it. That's
it. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. No, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, like what advice would you give to students in engineering, and like in terms of, looking for a job afterwards when they graduate, like what's some advice that you would have liked to known during the process?
I think that some of my friends looked to me, right after school and thought that because I had the corporate job and because it seemed like I was successful, quote unquote, right? And it didn't necessarily feel that way for me. I think that we get this idea in our head of what success is going to look like, and then you get yourself into that position and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I have chest pain because I'm stressed out. I was talking to one of the co-op students that I was working with about this, and I think of this book I read. It's called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And it was recommended by the head of Doctors Without Borders, which for a while was my dream job, kind of motivating me towards becoming a water and sanitation engineer with Doctors Without Borders. They rejected me, and I'm done getting rejections. I'm going to make my own path now. But anyway, that's an aside. But I'd been motivated by this book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. It's basically 685 pages of meandering, and I'm not going to make anyone listening to this read it. I'm not telling you to read it. Don't. But I can distill it down to like one statement, which is, when you are in school, you get peace of mind. Like everything that you're trying to do is about peace of mind. So when you're in school, you get peace of mind by being constantly validated by external sources. 75, 82, 91. And you know what? When you're in engineering, you get validated so much more frequently. You have so many assignments and whatnot. If you're in arts, you have like a term paper and a final, and you're stressed out the whole time, and you never sleep and whatever. So you're just also stressful. But when you're in engineering, you get validated a lot. And you get into the working world and you get an annual performance review once a year. They tell you, and then they're like, oh yeah, you're doing good. And so you're starved. Like you're just starved for validation because you don't know how to validate yourself. And this book it was essentially saying that, like, when you hand in a report to your boss, or when you cook a meal for your family, or when you're maintaining your motorcycle, you're not seeking out the good report or the good meal or the motorcycle. It's peace of mind. It's peace of mind that your boss will like the report. It's peace of mind that your family has a meal that will, it's nutritious and yummy and la la la, and they'll love it. It's peace of mind that your motorcycle is going to function appropriately. So you have to start taking care of yourself when you get out of school. You have to start finding out what gives yourself peace of mind, because that is not something that someone will teach you. It's just something you have to do. Yeah, that's what I would say. You have to learn how to validate yourself. And when it comes to work, when it comes to getting a job, like for more like kind of just quick tangible stuff, stepping stones are important. I had a friend that didn't show up for a job interview that I set up for him because whatever reason, we definitely had a hard time in our friendship after that moment. And I'd say that if they had done that job, it would still have been a stepping stone. It would still have, I took lots of stepping stone jobs. My first job was a call center in high school. Do you think I enjoyed working at a call center? No, but I also was great on the phone when in my corporate engineering job, I had to handle a lot of problems with people complaining. So it was a stepping stone, and don't undermine a stepping stone, even though oh, you're smart, you're an engineering student, you think you can do better than this. No, do the job. Not in this economy. You know what I mean? In this economy, we all need to work, and having a job is good. Don't complain about it. Be grateful for it. Do it well. Yeah, that was advice that I got from doing a shadow an engineering student day at Waterloo, actually, for your co-op job. They were like, guys, don't go on Facebook. Like, stupid stuff, right? But they also said one little nugget of wisdom that I'll share too. It was just that when someone gives you an easy task at a job, don't just be bored and take forever and take 2 weeks to do that task. Do it quickly, do it well. Just get all of those easy, stupid tasks out of the way. Prove to your management that you can do more things and do it well, and then they'll give you more responsibility slowly. So don't just complain and say this sucks and blah, blah, blah. No, just take the ownership on yourself. You know what I mean? Work hard, impress people. Maybe this is all obvious, but anyway, those are just little tidbits that I thought of when I think of like what I would say to my 16-year-old self or like my 18-year-old self or something. So yeah. Anyway.
No, that's absolutely amazing. Just the external validation piece is something that I definitely struggled once I left school, and then still, working with that right now. Just trying to find things that, as you say, like are of value to you, and make you as a person rather than looking for that 80, that 100. So yeah, that is all the advice that you gave is very, very important just for life in general, and I think that a lot of students will get a lot of value from it. So thank you, Kathryn, so much for being on the Health Analytic Insights podcast.
It was
And I
my
hope everyone
pleasure.
enjoyed this episode.
Yeah, this was really fun.